Let's start putting that through. Chuck it on now. So yeah, I've just sent out the email, but look, we'll get underway, and I'll keep admitting people as they pop through. So thanks everyone for jumping in today. But before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge all the traditional owners of all the lands in which we're dialing in from today, and pay my respects to the elders past, present, and emerging, as they continue to guide us with their wisdom and on this journey that we're running through. And a big shout out to all of you for making the time today. This is a really exciting conversation in sort of the first one that we're having in our perspective series with brother Shawn jumping in. And I'm not much, I'm going to say out the gate, I wasn't much of a coffee drinker. I'd always do it socially. And I think it's such a great concept to bring in and say, these discussions that we have are actually over a good cup of coffee. And yeah, I mean, like, I've been so impressed with this flavor that's come through. I mean, I started off with the light blend, but just the packaging and everything. And Shawn, whose idea was it to put the ripper zipper on the back? I saw it says do the ripper zipper on the back to actually open it. I thought that was pretty cool.
It's a pretty interesting debate. I think so. There's four with DHUWA Coffee, and I'll come back and I'll do an acknowledgement after I answer this question. But with DHUWA Coffee, the sort of Adam and I had the original idea, Adam Williams and I, and then that went into two other founders who are nuts about coffee. And I think I remember a discussion around the bags, because like, you got to remember, Ben, Bros, that this was just a drawing on a piece of paper, really, sort of the middle of last year. We had some coffee bags we played around in and done some things, Adam and I, myself, and basically to get to where it is now on shelf and to the packaging that it's in was the craziest 8-week period of my life in work. And the zipper side of it, I actually think the conversation came back around how do we keep the bag fresh, like the coffee fresh, and how does it look good still, and all that sort of stuff. And I actually think Adam said something like, can't we just get that, and he's pretty blunt, can't we just get that that clip thing they do, that thing that clips the bag together at the top and the seal, it's like the easy one, why can't we get that? And the other guys that were here were like, we can get that, that's something we can do. And since then, the conversations around the bag design, and you've got to remember too, like the gussets of the bag and stuff like this, words that I never knew existed. How does the coffee sit when it's on the shelf? Is it going to sit like this? Is it going to sit like that? When someone opens it at home, how are they going to reseal it, which is really important. How do we make sure that we're not getting too much air into the bag? All these things were really, really important to the quality of the coffee and the experience of the coffee drinker. Now, I think the idea around the zip thing was probably one of the easiest decisions to make. The things that we had difficulty with in the early days was, well, how are we going to get the barcoding and the color right and the packaging right and everything so it feels good? And it's a whole bunch of things. And it was, in many ways, a real baptism of fire to get that process going. So, yeah, crazy times.
And just to think, yeah, I mean, that's crazy to think it was just literally a concept and now it's being rolled out, through awards. I mean, like, and obviously, there's heaps that you're juggling. So I guess, yeah, focusing probably on that piece. How did you, get it to ramp up so quick in such a turbulent period of time being COVID?
Yeah, well, before I even have that conversation, I'll just say that I'm currently sitting in Naarm on Wurundjeri country. I want to thank Wurundjeri people for keeping my spirit safe on their country. And sort of, in my language, Bukananga Dara, Bukananga Maragam, Unya, Shawn Andrews. Look, here's the thing. If we're going to call it what it is, then COVID starts last year and we find ourselves in this position where all the non-Indigenous people, you hear them in their meetings, they're talking about, we've got to work from home. Well, what sort of desk am I going to get? What sort of chair am I going to get? How am I going to sit? And all these things. And here's the issue is that we're in the midst of this massive shit fight that is COVID. And there's no other way to describe it. And everyone remembers what it was like in those early days. Well, here's the reality for Indigenous people. We're used to being in a shit fight. Our existence in this country is constantly fighting all the time, trying to work out where and how we can push through and how we can be recognised. So when COVID began, whilst everyone else is out there worrying about what chair they get and what desk they get, we were just business as usual. And I think the issue for us at the time, because it's funny, you go back to January last year, and Adam has this want to push into Aboriginal medical services and help simplify how they buy things because it's complicated at the moment. And we had this conversation around, we should probably put some gift packs together, some sort of like pack they can buy. And one of the products that was in that pack was hand sanitizer. Now, in January last year, you couldn't give hand sanitizer away. And probably now you probably can't give it away either. There's so much of it in the country. But to get to where the coffee is and through Woolworths, this part of the story is really important, because we then, in sort of 6 weeks later, we didn't recognise that we had this exclusive arrangement for hand sanitizer from a factory. And it turns out that Woolworths, they only had around about 6 weeks left of hand sanitizers supplies in their supermarket. So when all the hand sanitizer cleaned off the shelf, there was a lot of sort of social media talk around, well, it's being cleaned off because people are buying it in bulk. Well, that's not the truth of the matter. It was being cleaned out by Woolworths because they needed it for their staff to keep them safe. So Woolworths reach out to us and they say, well, you've got this this great product. How do you want to sell it to us? And the funny sort of thing is, Ben, we had 2 pallets of it to getting prepared, and the Woolworths buyer says, well, we need 120 tons, and you've got 120 tons. And I'm sitting there on the other end of the phone. I'm going, yeah, thinking to myself, 2 pallets, that can't be 120 tons. And sure thing, we must have it. And of course, Woolworths, they're very clever. They know what's going on. They don't miss a beat. We go back to China and we talk to the factory, and sure enough, we have more than 120 tons there. And the next bit was needing to convince Woolworths to give us multiple millions of dollars up front, because at that time you couldn't actually buy anything in China unless it was up front. And the reality was that the Americans and the Germans were buying the entire truck of PPE and the driver pretty much as it went past. So you're dealing in a really volatile situation. So we convinced Woolworths, we need to do this. And they paid us within, I think it was like 36 hours, which is incredible to think that. Now, the other part of that story has been, we in January had a serious conversation about slowing Supply Aus up because it only had maybe $1,000 in a bank account. We didn't know what we were going to do with it. We had our own businesses. There was a lot of complexities. We then had to work out how to pay the Chinese factory up front. We didn't have the appropriate business account set up to be able to transfer that sort of money. And it red flags a lot of things when you're trying to transfer that amount of money overseas. So there was a learning process. We then managed within a 2.5 week period to, and there's a big story in this, which we're not going to talk about today. And someone should make a movie out of it because it's incredible. But we managed to get throughout China this factory to a plane in Hong Kong, and we flew the first plane of COVID supplies into the country during COVID. It was 114 tons, I think, in that first one of hand sanitizer. And that was extraordinary. And not just because a small Indigenous company managed to do that, but extraordinary for us because all of a sudden we were being met on a level and being recognised for our expertise and our leadership. And the fact that we were an Indigenous company didn't hinder us for that normal negative narrative that occurs in our world. It was like, you guys can work, you guys can do things. And then it just boomed from there. And we developed a great relationship with Woolworths and Woolworths Group, Woolworths Supermarkets. We needed to, at the end of last year, we wanted to expand on our brands because Adam and I have always been big on Indigenous people need to own some brands. We need to really generate some money to put back into things that we want to do, what the charities and stuff that we do and work with now. We met with Pete and Chris, 2 Greek fellas who own the oldest coffee roastery in the country. And we thought, well, it makes sense for us, our good fellas, to partner up the oldest living culture with the oldest coffee roastery. I thought that was a bit fun. Plus, Greeks have some understanding of what it's like to go through the sort of shit that we've been through. Still some learning to be done, but there was a bit of that. And then basically on January 1, we formed this new company. It was decided that we'd put our time and effort in. Everyone thought we'd get one SKU, so one product into Woolies in October, possibly. We rang the Woolies buyer. We had a meeting in this first week of Feb, and he said to us, no, we want 8 SKUs and you've got 14 weeks to do it. So 100 stores, 14 weeks later, all 8 SKUs of our product went in, and it's just sort of grown from there, which has been quite amazing experience.
Wow. No, that's incredible. So thanks for sharing, Shawn, because that gives you a real good insight of just the lead up into that. And I guess that you don't necessarily need to have it all completely roadmap, that there's these decisions that you need to make on the fly to actually get there. And probably with that, I guess over this period, because I mean that seems like a super success. It is a super success story, really, in the growth that it's had. Probably with like maybe some of the other businesses, or maybe even DHUWA. What's been some real roadblocks for you in this period?
Oh, there's been a lot of roadblocks across the board, but the interesting thing, say with DHUWA, as strange as it sounds, the roadblocks that you normally get to enter into a grocery chain weren't as big as what you'd probably think. So understanding a Coles or a Woolworths or a Metcash or any of those big chains in Australia, their systems is complicated. There's a lot of systems to get on board with. There's a lot of things to understand. And you'd think that they'd be a roadblock. And in some cases for Indigenous businesses to enter that space, it certainly is. But Woolworths, for us, were brilliant. They really helped us to navigate their systems and to get that there. The team that we have around us at DHUWA have also been incredible. We've got great graphic designers to work, and they work extraordinary hours to try and get some of these things done. Now, from the marketing team to the operations team to the people who pack the bags in there, just incredible process to get DHUWA into Woolworths. And there was very few blocks in that world for that. I think for DHUWA Coffee, it's been one of the more smoother processes. And part of that reason, Ben, is because we haven't needed to rely on, I suppose, the things that block us in other worlds, in other businesses that we have, to grow and do things. I think the Indigenous procurement policy, in a lot of ways, is very flawed. I think it blocks. So park DHUWA to the side, don't make sure you get some from Woolworths, nationally ranged now. Okay, guys. So please get some. But we didn't have really any blockers in that space. The blockers for Supply Aus and Indigicate and the other businesses that we're involved in has been, I suppose, the Indigenous procurement policy is one part, because people will only procure with you because of that IPP. And some of them won't procure at all because their view of Indigenous people is that we're not going to have the capacity or capability to scale up or deliver the things they need on tenders. And there's still an incredible amount of two things that occur. One is a tokenistic approach to working with Indigenous business, and the other is black cladding. And the sneakiness in which black cladding can occur. And adding to that as well, the inability for the Indigenous sector to fully monitor that and get rid of it. So I think when we jumped up and down about black cladding at the start of last year quite strongly, we got met with a lot of resistance around that. And that's an enormous blocker, because when you think about it, then there's no legislation in place, mandated legislation in Australia, to define how to work within that Indigenous procurement policy. So any grey area can be really exploited. And, you sit there and we sit there and we think about what things can be exploited. And sure enough, by the time we've finished having that conversation and you've started to Google it, you found people who have exploited it. And that's a massive blocker. Because big companies shouldn't I've got no problem with big companies buying into other Indigenous companies. I've got no problem with support. And you take a Kinaway, I sit on the board of Kinaway, you take Kinaway definition of membership, it's majority Indigenous owned and managed, and the decisions are made by Indigenous people in that business. If that's occurring, then great. But when the big companies essentially pay for an Indigenous person to come in and be the face of a brand that they develop, and there's no real brand there, and that blackleading occurs, nothing annoys me more than when that's just let to go. And I think probably another thing that now I think about that's a real blocker is there seems to be the same Indigenous people and the same Indigenous companies getting the same leg ups from the government and from the organisations that represent the government from Indigenous point of view. And it seems to be really repeating, going back to those same people. And I wonder what we can do differently to fix that. And I know you and I have had conversations about this in the past with I-FAB and the role that it could play in the growth out of, I suppose, say, Indigenous Accountant Australia, a model which was owned by CA and CPA and not by the Indigenous people. That taught me a lot about how do you have a membership base of Indigenous businesses that actually represents them. Because if you look at, I'll take Supply Nation as an example, I'm not Supply Nation's customer. I don't pay them anything. Their customer is corporates. And I challenge that model at times and sit there and go, how do we do that better? And I want to be free to challenge it without fear of being ostracized just by speaking up and saying, hey, we need to do this better. So there's a lot of those blockers that exist, but they don't necessarily exist in how do you get a product to market? How do you do that? You know, we've got one of our next big products, which is bungee boots to come through. And there's a few others that we've got as well. But it's a product that should go to market. That will be far easier to take to market than without IPP than it would be with it in some ways. So it's, I feel really strongly about some of those things.
No, absolutely. I think you touch on quite a few things there, and maybe part of that, and it's interesting to see your thoughts on this, is around how we define an Indigenous business. There's been a lot of debate around this for a number of years now. I know academics like sort of Dennis Foley up at Newcastle University back in 2005, did a piece on what Indigenous business would probably constitute and challenge the models that we have today. And so, and that was also cited in the report out of Melbourne Uni that you would have seen earlier this year around the Indigenous business sector and some of the stuff they've been doing with the Bureau of Statistics and creating iBlade. So I guess with that, in your perspective, what would you classify as an Indigenous business? Like what do you think an Indigenous business would mean to you?
Yeah. So here's the complexity in this we have some real heated discussions around this because we want this to work. All right. And sometimes you sit there and go, is an Indigenous business, say if brother or your sister's a carpenter and their husband or wife owns part of that business with them. All right. And all of a sudden it's 50-50 owned by that same family. Is that an Indigenous business? Well, maybe it is by definition. What if Woolworths, I use Woolworths because I love their brand. What if Woolworths Supermarkets comes in and says, hey, Shawn, we're going to do a share swap with you. We're going to take 50% of DHUWA and you're going to get 50% of Woolworths. Does Woolworths now become an Indigenous business? Is it now just because an Indigenous person owns a certain amount of it? Plus, anyone who knows anything about business, and trust me, I didn't know these things when I started, I had to learn. We could enter into a partnership right now and I could be 51% owner, but we could put in a really complex share agreement that outlines where the profits go, and I might only see 5% of those profits. And it might be in the form of getting paid monthly. So the definition as we see it at the moment is flawed because it's not legislated. And in any environment where all you need is a stat deck to prove that you're Indigenous, when money's involved, that is fraught with danger. And I don't necessarily know how you fix that problem, because part of what you need to have, in my opinion, is you need people to have certificate of Aboriginality, needs to be from their community, their apical ancestry, all right, their traditional ownership group, whatever language you want to do. And it needs to be legislated that if an Indigenous business is majority owned and ran or defined within this sort of idea of how the Indigenous people can manage it and own it, then if you're not that, or if you're lying about that, you need to get fined or go to jail, because we're not talking about $10 or $20 here. I would argue that there are $20 million Indigenous businesses out there that are incredibly black-cladded, and they're able to really rip off those rules that exist now. Now, I can tell you everything about this coffee bag and how it was done, even though I knew nothing about it previously, because I'm across every step of what happens with this. If you start asking those sorts of questions within Indigenous business, it helps you really quickly to find whether they know what they're talking about in their business or not. Can they pick up their balance sheet and explain it to you right now? If my accountant said, balance sheet, Shawn, here it is, I need you to explain to Ben this, this, and this. If they can't explain that, then they don't run the business, right? If the box turns up to the place that's bought the product and it has a completely different name on there of a bigger company that you've partnered with and this doesn't come from your business, is that an Indigenous business? And is it a sustainable business? Let's talk about that idea of box clipping. Do you really have a business? You're playing in a margin game? Great. Maybe that's what you love to do, but that can fall apart really quickly. So I'm really big on the idea that we need to legislate this. We need to look at certificates of Aboriginality as a baseline. They need to be from apical ancestry, traditional ownership groups in that format. And then that opens up a complex conversation of treaties and Aboriginal people treating amongst each other and stuff like that. But it needs to be more than what it is now. And what there really needs to be right now, Ben, more than anything, is a platform to be able to put complaints in about this, to be taken seriously about it, and to not feel like you get left out. And I would think that Supply Aus, because we complained about black cladding last year, it did two things for us. It gave us opportunities to organisations that were legit. And they went, we don't want to be part of that. So we're going to double down and we're going to ask you the real hard questions of what you think black cladding is and work with it. And then there were other companies that we were excluded from Indigenous organisations that are meant to support us because they feared or they were we'd upset the apple cart, so they didn't want to work with us. And that's not what this is meant to be about. So I think there's a lot to talk about in this space of identifying Indigenous business. We saw in the old days with the Indigenous accountants how that was set up, what happens when you don't actually have Indigenous ownership. We need to change that. And how that model works, I think Kinaway does a great job as a Chamber of Commerce. It's incredible what they do down here in Victoria. It's really well led. It's got a great CEO. It's got amazing staff in there. And, Karen Millwood and those people who started it fought really hard to make it sort of self-determined. I think the Murray Chamber has launched in Queensland and will be incredible in that space too. I think those local chambers will bring a lot more security to how Indigenous business are engaged and what that looks like. And the element also of changing the negative narrative around Indigenous businesses. Because that's often a blocker too, because people look at you and go, well, we have a different form of management and leadership in what we do. It's really unique to us. It's quite an incredible asset at the moment. And sometimes that really scares businesses. They sit there and go, oh, these guys might be too relaxed, or they might be too serious, they might be too political. But we're not. This is just our reality and how we work. And we've got a lot of capabilities and a lot of skills, and people need to change the way they perceive us. So there's still a lot of education to be done.
No, I really like your idea around we do need to have a bit more legislation, and I'd agree. This is a, yes, the report shows that we're growing, and a number of that sort of comes out of IPP. But if we are going to have this success, and I think you touched on it earlier as well, we need to have the brands, we need to have the products that stand out, that show that we can deliver. And yes, it needs to be legislated so that then, you set the expectation very clearly of what it actually means, and that you remove the loopholes. But that's probably a difficult process to, because there are people that are profiting. Do we do things like, and this is probably something I thought of, and just want to get your thoughts with the IPP. I don't really know how much people, when they win a contract, have to do reporting on, how they've executed the contract, where it goes. Like, just from your experience and understanding, is that, something that could be an early push to start to sort of weed out some of the blackleading issues?
Absolutely. So you think about it from this point of view, and I can't talk about this directly because it's a bit of commercial incompetence. But what we are seeing now is when the government implements a tender or a contract with a company, and they place in there that you will lose your tender or contract if you do not meet the milestones of having this amount of Indigenous spend or engagement by this time frame, whether it's, a quarter of the way through the contract or at the beginning or whatever. We are now finding that's being taken seriously, to the point where multinational companies are reaching out to us because of our capacity and capability, and saying, we want to work with you because you can actually deliver on this. And in the background, there's this element of, if they don't spend this money and do this well, they will lose their contract and tender. So it forces them to work with us. Now, the problem with that is, if someone comes right now with a $500 million contract to an Indigenous business and says, we need you to deliver on this $500 million contract in the next 12 months. One of the issues you've got is, we don't necessarily have the scalability to do it straight away. We still need the assistance of the other businesses to work with us. We still need that understanding of, if you're going to help us, you've got to be in there with us initially to get us to where it's got to be. Because there aren't many Indigenous businesses now that could pick up a $500 million procurement contract tomorrow and be able to deliver next week on what's required. And that's the danger. So if you look at Supply Aus, someone might engage us to do a contract like that, and they might think we have a lot of expertise, and they might try and help us. But if we succeed, everyone looks good. But if we fail, given the success we've had and what we represent, how much damage does that failure do to not just us, but the Indigenous community in general, and I suppose the perception of Indigenous business? Because if we fail on a big contract, and we don't deliver, then all of a sudden the non-Indigenous businesses of the world can say, well, we went to Supply Aus, they're one of the biggest businesses in this Indigenous space, and they can't deliver, so how are they ever going to be able to deliver? And that's the danger when you do write that into those contracts and tenders, because there's a little bit of education that needs to occur before you get to that point. Now, don't get me wrong, getting contracts and getting money and doing that's great. It allows us to work more and spend more with Indigenous business and do all the things that we want to do. But we've got to make sure that that legislation, what goes in there, has a clause of, you're not just going to dump this on Indigenous people. You're not going to just do what we continuously have done over time, which is equally underestimate the brilliance of Indigenous people, at the same time trying to make us fit a mold immediately without any assistance, based on the Western perception of what that mold needs to be. They need to really work with us to engage us to put it into the framework that we want to work in. And there are businesses doing that. And I can say, my hand on my heart, that Woolworths has been one of those over the last 6 months in particular. I've had one-on-ones with the chair of their board, the head of their supermarkets. We get great relationships across the board there with them, because they are engaging and looking at us from the brilliance point of view and what we can do as Indigenous people, but also from that, what capacity, what's our responsibility to develop this capacity? Because we may not have put Indigenous people, Woolworths didn't put Indigenous people in this colonisation mode that we're in. This was done 220 years ago. They're not responsible for it, but they are responsible for helping to fix that. And if they take that approach when engaging Indigenous business on big contracts, then we will succeed all the time. We will actually thrive. So that's a big part of what I think would need to happen with that thing there, with that engaging Indigenous business. Legislation would be great, but I do wonder, Ben, if we legislated today, this afternoon, how many Indigenous businesses would disappear by lunchtime tomorrow?
No, totally. No, totally. Absolutely. I hardly agree with that. And, I think you raise a good point there around, being able to pick up on big procurement pieces that get dropped on us. And it's, and probably just before I open up to questions from the broader audience, probably one final one from me just on what you've touched on, and also John sort of put in the chat around Indigenous businesses and having that black circular economy, where your funds go. Do we have something where you sort of set up, and this is something I've thought about, where you have like your listed corporations, much like an ASX type of view, where Indigenous people can invest into that company, dividends are paid to those people that invest, and it sort of comes back into community. Now, whether that be just local community or broadly across the sort of country, what are your thoughts on that as a model where you have, and particularly if you have multiple businesses running things, they come together as a sort of conglomerate. What are your sort of thoughts around having like listed corporations?
Well, I think we need to say to ourselves, we need legitimate listed corporations and entities that I think there's a social procurement investment possibility that we're not even scratching the surface of. So if you think of corporate social responsibility and corporate social values and the big funds in this country and how they're wanting to invest in social enterprises and good businesses all around, I think there's a real opportunity to do that. I think the IPP hinders that at times because we want to see Black people get paid. We want to see Black people succeed. We want to see that growth. But would you call me a sellout tomorrow if Bupa came and bought 80% of my company and gave me the money to then grow this company into an extraordinarily big Indigenous unit, knowing that Adam was actually running through some figures this morning. Adam, who's Williams, is my business partner at Supply Aus. And the spend that we've spent back into the community and other Indigenous businesses, I think it was 1.4 million last year that we spent on Indigenous businesses. Now, I guarantee we don't wake up in the morning, we don't go, hey, who should, like, we've got to engage Indigenous business. Like, Adam doesn't ring me up and say, go out today and engage in Indigenous business. We don't need to, because it's just part of what we do. It's like, we're going to buy coffee. Well, who are the Indigenous businesses around? Who's legit? Do your research, work it out. Let's buy our coffee from them. And if they're not competitive in price, let's tell them that for an example, so that then at least we're having the conversation, not just not engaging them. I think Indigenous businesses, when they get financially secure and individuals get financially secure, they spend more on Indigenous business. They create more of that economy on their own. And the circular economy, Indigenous business, I think we all do so much in that space that's not recognised. And that's probably also our cultural way of doing things. I'm not going to sit here and say, I went and bought this or spent this money on that just to support my brother over there, or bought that artwork from someone because I know that they really need the money and I could afford it at the time. But that's not our way. We give and we work together. I don't know whether we could do an ASX model on our own. I certainly think we need to get better at measuring the social impact that our businesses have. And somehow it needs to be driven from the business sector, not from the university sector, not from the government sector. I'm really sick and tired of universities and governments telling me how good or bad our businesses are. I don't need them to do it. It feels like the things that my grandmother would go on and on about around the concept of we never get asked what we need. We only get told what we want. We always get told what we need. You know, I remember my first ever lesson at Indigicate with year 4s. One of the kids said, "What's the problem with Indigenous communities?" It's like 8-9 years ago. And I wanted to turn around that child and say, there's nothing wrong with us. We don't need to change. The white fellas need to change. We're okay. But I sort of sat there and went, here's an analogy. Is that your best friend sitting next to you? I said, yeah. Well, she's got a headache, yeah? Worst headache she's ever had. Now, you go to your house, you just walk straight in there at her house because, you know, you're friends. You don't need a knock. And you get in there, what do? And every time thereafter with these conversations, the kid would say, oh, I say, what's wrong? What's wrong? I've got a headache. What do? I'm going to get her some Pandol. And off they go and they get a Pandol. And they come back and then I say, guess what? She's still not feeling well. She said, but I gave her some Pandol. I said, yeah, but what she really needs is a glass of water or a glass of milk. Really? I said, yeah, but what did you not do? And every time the year 4 would go, they were going to go, oh, I didn't ask her what she wants. I said, well, that's the problem with Indigenous communities. We're not the problem. The problem is that people come in all the time and tell us what we need and spend far too little time asking us what we actually need and want. And when we tell them, like we say, black cladding is an issue, people don't actually get up and do anything about it. And they find ways to get around it or ignore it. Or how many times, Ben, have you sat at the table in an Indigenous discussion, had a great idea, and you know it's going to work, and you tell everyone, and they go, great idea, Ben. And at the end of it, they go, but we're just going to keep doing what we're doing anyway, because we know what's best for you. That to me is the thing that really needs to change. We need the business sector to drive this. And we've got strong Indigenous business sector. We just need a treaty amongst ourselves somehow to get this shit sorted.
Love that, brother. I totally agree. That's what these conversations I think are really important about as well. It's just changing the dialogue up a bit, just being extremely raw like you have, and just openly putting it out there and going, let's do something about it and circle back. And I think that's, to your point about having a space where you can do that. That's exactly what, you know, we're trying to create here, is a space where we can all voice our opinions, concerns, and actually work together to do it. To your point, bring the business model in, work with the academics and go, okay, what's a good structure that works? Can we optimize even further? And then you start pressing government saying, well, this is what we need to do. We've done all the underlying work with business sector and, you know, the structures to go, this will work. So I totally agree with what you're saying. So I might just open up if anyone's got any questions on the floor.
Nice, easy ones, yeah?
Yeah, literally anything about what Shawn said today, or about any of his companies, or just about concepts.
Or about my cool haircut. I'm open to any questions. So
ask a question, Ben. If just Shawn, awesome. Social impact and have you seen anyone? Do you think anyone's doing it? Are there any Indigenous businesses capturing it, or have you had a crack at it? Or do you know anyone who's like? I'm just, you know, because I think you flag an important point, and I'm just wondering, you know, your thoughts on exposure to it and others sort of, you know, I can see Sarah's got a hand up there. But yeah, I wouldn't mind just your thoughts on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I think Sarah's probably someone that we'll turn to. I think she'll probably, with any luck, get interviewed by Ben at some stage to talk about how you put that dollar value on there for that social impact bit, which is important because we need to be able to report this to the people who understand money and understand accounting really, really well, because it's critical to getting more money out of the government, for example, for programs that we need. I suppose from our point of view, we literally had this conversation this morning around how do we need to measure this better at Supply Aus. Like, how do we measure this better and actually show everyone what we're doing? Like Jolene Hicks, who's another one of our business partners at Supply Aus, she's always talking about what we can do out there, and Adam's always talking about what we need to do with our money to ensure that our business survives. And meanwhile, we've already done all these brilliant things. And how do you measure that and then report it back? I think for me, the easy one is, say, with any of the brands we've got, and you know me, Adrian, well enough to know that everything I do is set up around Indigenous disadvantage. And I've always had this dream of ending kids in care, the situation that goes on there, just getting rid of it, which needs to be, we need to create obviously a lot more revenue to do that. And an easy way for us to measure was we set up a charity. The charity is going to go work in that space. We're going to give X amount of percentage of profit back that charity. But that would only capture a really small part of what we do. From the employment that we have to do, which sometimes is really difficult to measure, because the impact on that one individual who you get to come and work in your office space is impacting a whole community. And where's that dollar going? How many times does it circulate through? We need to measure it better. And for us, we can sort of give rough totals. And we did spend an extraordinary amount of money, north of $1 million on community last year in different areas, because we needed to, not necessarily because we sat down one day and went, it's good for everyone. It's just that we actually need to spend that money and work in that space because we need Indigenous businesses to survive. We needed to feed people. There's a whole bunch of things. But at the end of the day too, you've got to be able to measure that back to what does that look like for your business, because your business needs to survive. Otherwise, all that ends. And I think there's certainly, I had this conversation with Sarah Hyland last year, might have been earlier this year, it feels like an eternity in lockdown in Melbourne, around, hey, sis, you've got a great concept of measuring the spend in this. We need to get this right. Because let's just say Supply Aus IPOs, and we go out and we want to get people to buy our shares and invest in our company. If we can tell them this is the social spend that we're doing, and then outline the programs and how that happens under, it becomes a no-brainer. We all of a sudden will get invested in left, right, and center, and our share price will go through the roof. So there's a lot to gain in that real business world around this, but we just don't do enough of it. And I think, part of it, Adrian, is we got some exciting news to come in the next few months around how we've changed our model and how we can grow. But for 12 months there, you got Adam and I, in particular, working on and in the business all the time. And that's sort of one of the things that hinders Indigenous people from able to do these great projects like measuring your social spend, if that's what we want to call it. But there's, I think, some research needs to be done into it. I think we need to commit more to that model. And that would be brilliant to be able to measure that. And, Indigenous people really are pretty humble. They don't talk about, I got helped over here, or I helped over there, or I did that. That is just innate to our being. So, yeah. So to answer your question, yes, we need to do more of it. And the person who is across that and probably the leader in the Indigenous space is in this forum at the moment, and she's brilliant. And I think we'll change a lot of things. But then we've also got to open up to giving her the data as businesses as well, and not be scared of that, which is going to take a leap of faith on our end.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think Sarah had a hand up too. I think Sarah wanted to.
Yeah, Sarah, jump in.
I don't have much to add, but just to say that, yes, it does need research. It needs time and resources, but it's something I'm doing in my spare time at the moment amongst, running a typical accounting business. And, that's my dream, is just to have the time to invest in that, but also resources, because, so yeah, I think there's a lot more conversations to have within this group. A lot of the people in the group, Shawn and I have both started out at Indigenous accountants, and look, we're both here walking the talk now, and showing what it can look like when we lead the way, when it's driven by us.
Absolutely, I agree. And just looking in the chat, Beck put in, things around shape and measuring, Mitch Ross, Murra Group, Carol Vale, Marwin, Sarah, you. So yeah, correct. We need to have these topics, expand on them. And that's what I'm definitely thinking. We can have separate streams almost to tackle these different elements, so that they, run in parallel and merge up. So it's like, how do we do the measuring and the valuing? How do we change that? How do we look at the definitions around Indigenous business, like have these working groups, get them sort of running simultaneously and push them through. Just looking at a question from Marley. Shawn, how excited are you about the DHUWA and the Dreaming Futures partnership?
Yeah, I think I could probably work in the charity and the work that I do with kids, and it wouldn't feel like I'm working, Ben, to be honest. So I'm really excited. And it's not just DHUWA. DHUWA certainly has started off the Dreaming Futures partnership. And it will enable us to work closely with. We need corporate partners who are willing to come on campuses with kids and commit to raising money and helping us with that. And then I think the reality for us is we're going to allow our Indigenous businesses to all commit to the charity. And before this meeting, Ben, I was on with the community, and I'm so pumped about this, talking about Indigenous kids and challenges and what they need to get through. The timing for Dreaming Futures couldn't be any better. And not just because I think we're going to raise an extraordinary amount of money for Dreaming Futures, and we're going to work with those kids in care, sort of the unfortunate bottom 20% of kids with opportunities in our communities. But we're also the communities are ready, and the corporates are ready, and I'm going to give you the greatest cultural experience you've ever had in your life by volunteering to come out on our camps with us while we do cultural experiences with our kids. And what you're going to give us in return is you're going to normalize the workforce and the workplace by introducing them to a GM or a manager whose name is Steve, just happens to be a good person, who might work at Woolworths. And all of a sudden that's a contact that kid to have that conversation and to grow on. And that's critical. And I'm just pumped about it. And I think DHUWA, from the coffee alone, we aim to sort of get $300,000 or $400,000 from DHUWA back into the Dreaming Futures. And I think DHUWA will end up becoming a very small part of what Dreaming Futures can raise. And some of the big companies around are now starting to talk to us about, oh, hold on, if we buy from you, and this has been the best part of the new model that we work on. So if we buy your coffee, you give to the charity. I said, yeah, but how about this? How about, I know you can't give us cash because it's too difficult in the modern corporate to get cash given to you. It takes so much time for a charity. But if I add $2.50 to your procurement spend right now, and that $2.50 goes directly to the charity, and I can give you a DGR receipt, so you get that 100% tax back, and then you can claim that on your CSR spending, and also with Indigenous business, would you do it? And we're finding that the answer is yes. So not only can we sell products and make money that go back to the charities and things we care about, but the corporates and the organizations are starting to have that view as well, where this is a way for them to give us money for a charity that does good and be involved without needing to go through the big process of, we need a $500,000 check, can you give us that? So that to me is incredible. And for those in here who know me, you'll know that when I was 8, I dreamt about Dreaming Futures. I was sitting on Mount Murra, which just got a fantastic article in The Age from Johnny Boy Clark a few weeks ago. I was sitting on that mountain. I knew in my heart that I could create something that would end this pain for our kids. And my grandmother used to say to me, the best thing you can do is become a taxpayer. And at 8 years of old, I had no idea what that meant, Ben. But basically what she was saying, that if you pay tax, then you can get health insurance, you can look after your community, you've got a job, you've got money to do things with. And essentially all we can do with these young people is create taxpayers. And it starts at 8 years of age and it goes right through to 23. And I started thinking about that when I was like 8 years old in that mountain. And my whole life, through that journey, through my gambling addiction and homelessness to where I am now, with one of the largest Indigenous companies in the country and the largest Indigenous FMCG product in the country. It's all built towards going to Dreaming Futures in one way or another. So.
Wow. No, Andrew, that's bro, that's
thanks, Paul.
Amazing. No, so Shawn, that's awesome. That's honestly, bro, to go from dreaming of something that young to implementing, going through challenges, wearing these different hats, you know, whether it being study, family, community, you know, to actually get to where you have now is incredible. And thank you for, you know, sharing your time with us today. It's definitely, I don't think the last time we're going to be having a yarn in this group. I really want to take some of what you've shared with us today and sort of push that forward. And all these people on this call, you know, are super invested in this space, and you know, we're on this journey all together. So I'm really looking forward to pushing it. So we're conscious of time, but thanks brother for you know, dropping all the wisdom, and thanks everyone for joining today. And we'll be in touch with you post this to get some feedback on some future topic areas we should dive into and make sure that we're all on that.
Yeah. And thanks, Ben, for the opportunity. I'm a big supporter of I-FAB and always have been since the initial conversations, was it Melbourne or Sydney or Geelong or somewhere all those years ago. And just to keep pushing through, and I think we need I-FAB to be strong. And there's a role for it to play also with some of the businesses that we've got now and are operating as well. I think I'll also add that the guy being a jerk in the comments is my business partner, Adam. He's not my favorite business partner. Jerome and Gary, who will be my new business partners at some stage, will be my favorite ones by far. Just to shut him up a little bit and make that work. And thanks, Beck. I do have two girls as well who are beautiful. We had one of them during COVID, and I think one of the things is
and your wife.
Well, I didn't have her during COVID, but she is beautiful and obviously amazing. She puts up with my shit, which is kudos to her and credit to her, I suppose. But a lot of the conversations have been coming back is like, how do you do all these things and stuff during this COVID time? And I keep going back to the conversation we had earlier, is that the time in COVID is irrelevant to us. Outside of people dying and the stuff that hurts us at that level, this space and what's going on, we've been going through this shit and nonsense for 220 years of colonization. So for us, we're just able to keep moving forward. And that's all we do. We're all destined to be ancestors. That's the first thing. And we walk on the shoulder of those ancestors before us. And we owe it to them, absolutely owe it to them, to make sure that we keep pushing forward and working hard and doing the things that we do. And the most important part of that is that we need to come together and be able to, people need to recognize again, that just because we disagree on something doesn't mean we don't like each other. We need to be able to have those conversations again and work on it and come together more. And that's probably the parting words to me today, Ben, in this space. And so I really love your work, and I look forward to the next I-FAB ones. And I think Sarah should be your next guest, just quietly. So,
no, for sure, she's definitely on the list. Absolutely.
Yeah, I-FAB too. You doing another conference, bro? Well, because it's going to go to millions of people when we save it and send it out there on the web. So,
oh no, absolutely. Yeah, we're waiting for things, and now they're starting to open back up. So that's definitely the plan, to bring everyone back in centrally. I think it was very powerful to have, you know, your governments, your academics, your business owners, exactly what you were saying, all in the room and actually just doing it live. You know, having, you know, that comfort to be vulnerable, to discuss these quite sensitive topics without any repercussions. Yeah, there's nothing like doing that. But I think to keep it going, yeah, we'll do these type of small working groups so that when we get to the conference, it's almost like a bring together and actual, here's your end-to-end execution that we need to put in.
Great. I look forward to that one, and we'll be there with bells on. So,
nah, love it. Too good. And just a quick one for Beck. There's some amazing events, and some of the my sister girls on this call will be in those events that have been run out of UNSW next week for Indigenous Business Month. So yeah, we'll also send around that link when we touch base with you all after, but definitely one to jump onto.
Thanks, Ben.
I didn't see Beck's favourite student doing a talk there next week. Beck, why am I not I'm like, forgotten
Yes,
about me at AGSM or something. Go to an MBA and they forget about
Data.
it. Speaking,
So if I could, you know me, so we're running a whole suite of events with Titters in Business. So you fellas, I love you dearly, you know that. And you know me, we've actually got 6 events happening every day, and we're showcasing a whole lot of ones on the ground as well as people, you know, and you know me, it's always about bringing those opportunities round, and it's all in partnership. So I love you all, you know that, and I, you know, and for me, it's always about, you know, as a uni, we've got an opportunity to platform so that your voices are front and center. So, and my trouble is always is I know hundreds of extraordinary mobs, so I bring it through. But I hope you'll join us, and Sam and Yanti are on our finale, which is going to be really extraordinary next Friday, which is about visaging the future. All these kind of yarns you've been having here. So I hope you'll join us. But big respect and love to both you and Ben. You know, I love your work. I'm always there with you. Thanks for letting me have a minute or two.
appreciate it, Beck. And probably, Ben, what I heard back from the AGSM community in there to the MBA students, there isn't probably an opportunity, if we look at it, to do with an I-FAB to involve MBA students in that, to become part of that conference, because there's a real appetite at the moment at that level, I think, too. And Beck's just sort of got me thinking about another conversation I had with that school yesterday. But all beautiful things. And Sarah, Darwin would be perfect for I-FAB too, I think. So speaking for someone from Melbourne who hasn't been out of the state, I'd love to go to Darwin. It'd be great.
Absolutely. No, that's something we were thinking of doing. So yeah, time to bring those back on the table for sure. Awesome. All right. That's it. We'll crunch us of time. Thanks everyone for turning up. Too good, Shawn. Thank you. And we'll be in touch soon. Have a good rest of the afternoon.
Really, bro. Take it easy. See you guys.